July 18, 2026. New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani has said that he is consulting with city authorities over the possibility of arresting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if he visits the city for the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, in September. In an interview with the New York Times, NYT, released on Saturday, Mamdani reiterated his view that Netanyahu, who is the subject of an ICC arrest warrant for possible crimes against humanity in Gaza, must be brought to justice for the Israeli military's actions in Gaza. While Washington is busy sweating over a hyper-fractured foreign policy and trading heavy military blows overseas, NYC's mayor is out here trying to turn the United Nations into a local precinct booking room, which brings us to a hilarious yet totally serious paradox. Mamdani is a guy who has spent his first 6 months notching real, tangible, nuts and bolts policy wins at home. But this latest maneuver sounds less like municipal governance and more like a rejected script for a lethal weapon reboot. So we have to ask the million-dollar question. Is this just a stroke of genius political theater designed to hype up his progressive base, or does the mayor genuinely believe he can pull off the international border bust of the century? For the viewers who might not be glued to New York's local political circus, you need to understand exactly who we're dealing with here. Zoran Mamdani is not your typical establishment suit. Born in Kampala, Uganda, to a post-colonialist academic and an acclaimed filmmaker, he completely bypassed the traditional democratic machine. He started out as a housing counselor and a hip-hop artist, believe it or not, before surging into the state assembly in 2020 by unseating a 5-term incumbent. Then, in 2025, he shattered the establishment's expectations by defeating former Governor Andrew Cuomo in the mayoral primary. Mamdani didn't just win the general election, he absolutely steamrolled it. He walked into City Hall with a massive mandate, becoming the first NYC mayoral candidate to rack up over 1 million votes since 1969. In doing so, he made history as the city's first Muslim and first Asian American mayor. But here's where the dynamic gets really interesting: the split between his domestic policy and his international rhetoric. If you only listen to his sound bites on the Middle East, you might think he's entirely focused on global revolution. But look at his actual administrative record. In his first 6 months in office, Mamdani has proven to be fiercely competent at home. He seamlessly closed a staggering $5.4 billion budget deficit, successfully pushed through a rent freeze on 1- and 2-year leases, and secured state funding for universal childcare. He's even engineering what people are now calling the Mamdani effect, leveraging his massive local popularity to help progressive challengers score huge upsets against incumbent Democrats in the 2026 congressional primaries. The man is essentially a leftist kingmaker masquerading as a city administrator. All of this sheer domestic competence is exactly what makes his wild foreign policy flexes so fascinating. Which brings us to the inciting incident of the week. In a July 18th interview with the New York Times, Mamdani doubled down on what many thought was just a symbolic campaign promise. He announced that he is in active conversations with the city's law department to figure out if he can send the NYPD to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu when the Israeli Prime Minister arrives for the UN General Assembly this September. He essentially wants to enforce the International Criminal Court's ICC arrest warrant on the streets of Manhattan. It's an insanely audacious move for a local mayor. But given his track record of doing what the establishment says is impossible, people are actually pausing to wonder, could he really pull this off? The short answer is no, not under existing U.S. and international law. While Mayor Mamdani commands the New York Police Department, NYPD, and could theoretically issue a rogue directive, legal experts widely consider the threat of an arrest to be legally baseless. Mamdani himself has acknowledged that he will not rewrite laws to achieve this, and is currently having active conversations with the city's legal department to determine what is actually permissible. If the mayor were to attempt to enforce the International Criminal Court ICC arrest warrant against Prime Minister Netanyahu, the effort would immediately hit a wall of overwhelming legal barriers. Lack of ICC jurisdiction. The United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, the treaty that established the ICC. Therefore, The U.S. does not recognize the court's jurisdiction over its own territory, and ICC warrants hold no legal weight on American soil. To the federal government, an ICC warrant carries about as much legal weight in Manhattan as a coupon for a restaurant that went out of business in 1995. Federal laws prohibiting cooperation. U.S. federal law explicitly restricts government entities from cooperating with the ICC. Local municipalities cannot legally bypass federal statutes to enforce international warrants. You can't just bypass the U.S. Constitution because you have a city police force at your disposal. Diplomatic immunity. Under both U.S. and international law, sitting heads of state and foreign officials attending United Nations assemblies are granted strict diplomatic immunity. Furthermore, a specific federal law strictly prohibits the obstruction or imprisonment of foreign officials. Federal supremacy. The U.S. Constitution grants the federal government exclusive authority over foreign policy and international diplomacy. A local mayor cannot run an independent foreign policy. New York State leadership has also publicly noted that the NYC mayor simply does not possess the statutory power to execute such an arrest. Beyond the law, the logistics and political realities of attempting to arrest a visiting world leader make the scenario functionally impossible. Clashing security forces. During the UN General Assembly, foreign leaders are heavily protected by a combination of their own national security teams and U.S. federal agencies, such as the Secret Service and the State Department's Diplomatic Security Service. Any attempt by the NYPD to detain Netanyahu would result in a massive, unprecedented physical standoff with federal agents. Hostile federal posture. The current federal administration is staunchly opposed to the ICC's actions regarding Israel. The federal government has previously issued executive orders targeting the ICC and has levied severe sanctions against the court's officials in retaliation for these specific warrants. Any local attempt to enforce the ICC's would face immediate, overwhelming federal intervention, likely resulting in swift legal injunctions and severe consequences for the city. So if it's legally and practically impossible, what is Mamdani actually doing? Look closely at his exact phrasing to the New York Times. Whatever the law allows me to do, that's what we will do. But we won't be writing our own laws to that end. This is a textbook, cover your assets political strategy. The mayor knows full well that his hands are tied. By announcing that he is consulting with the city's lawyers, he gets to look like an absolute warrior to his progressive base while perfectly setting up a fallback excuse. When the city's corporate counsel inevitably hands him a 50-page document explaining why he can't make the arrest, he can throw his hands up and say, "Hey, I wanted to do it, but the establishment lawyers stopped me." It's a flawless win-win for his political brand. Naturally, the opposition has fired back with everything they've got. Right-wing radio personalities have hurled intense vitriol his way, with some going as far as calling him a cockroach before being forced to walk it back, while Netanyahu himself publicly claimed that the mayor secretly hates America. But for Mamdani, this hostility is pure fuel. Every time an establishment figure or a foreign leader attacks him, it only solidifies his status as a progressive martyr who is willing to take on the biggest names in global politics. Now, it is easy to dismiss all of this as nothing more than a highly orchestrated theatrical stunt. In terms of the actual legal logistics, it is. But if you think Mamdani is just screaming into the void, you are missing the forest for the trees. The sentiment driving this political theater is a reflection of a massive, tectonic shift happening right beneath the feet of the Democratic establishment. Look at the data from recent polling. Nearly 3/4 of Democratic voters now openly oppose U.S. aid to Israel, a staggering leap from just 45% a mere 3 years ago. On top of that, nearly half of those surveyed explicitly state that their party has been far too supportive of Israel's military campaigns. For decades, unwavering bipartisan support for Israel was the golden rule of Washington politics. If you broke that rule, your political career was effectively over. But Mamdani is looking at these numbers and realizing that the old playbook is completely outdated. We are even seeing this filter up to the federal level. Just this past week, nearly half of the Democratic members in the U.S. House of Representatives voted to end U.S. aid to Israel. A vote like that would have been completely unthinkable a few years ago. It shows that while the top tier of the party leadership remains fiercely traditional, The rank-and-file base and the younger generation of politicians are sprinting in the opposite direction. By threatening to arrest Netanyahu, Mamdani isn't just talking to his constituents in Queens or Brooklyn. He is positioning himself as the national lightning rod for the anti-war, pro-Palestinian movement. He is drawing a massive line in the sand, forcing establishment Democrats to choose between defending a foreign leader with an international warrant over his head or aligning with a rapidly growing, fiercely passionate wing of their own voting base. It's a calculated long-term play, and right now, Mamdani is controlling the narrative. So what is the final verdict? Is Mamdani just putting on a show? Yes, absolutely. But dismiss it as merely a show at your own political peril. This is high-stakes, masterfully calculated political theater with a very specific purpose. The mayor is well aware that the NYPD won't be slapping handcuffs on Netanyahu this September. However, by simply making the threat, he forces the political establishment to actively defend an official targeted by the ICC, allowing Mamdani to completely dominate the narrative in front of an increasingly sympathetic base. With a skyrocketing 58% approval rating and an undisputed status as a progressive superstar, you might think Mamdani is lining himself up for a future run at the White House. But here lies the ultimate poetic twist of constitutional irony. Because he was born in Uganda and is a naturalized citizen, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution completely bars him from ever becoming president. He is playing the role of kingmaker because, by law, he can never actually wear the crown himself. But as long as he controls the narrative from City Hall, he doesn't need to be in Washington to completely disrupt the game.